Welcome back to week number 2 of Death's Door, our cheery class, where we talk about some scary things here that all of us who will die and live here where death currently is in charge have to deal with while we're trying to live out God's call. If I were there, I would have drawn on the whiteboard for you gladiators, and it would have said, "We who are about to die, I salute you." Because last week I did the "Beware all who enter here." I have a creepy picture for each week. You're welcome. I thought it was charming. Okay. Death's Door. This week we're going to talk about confusion. Last week we talked about fear and ultimately despair. And we rid ourselves of despair and decided that life is worth living and love is worth having. So that's your first blank. We rid ourselves of despair. And I would say we also equipped ourselves to deal with some fear. And that's awesome. Yay! So now we are free to live in response to God's call. Yay, class dismissed. Just kidding. But wait, what exactly does that mean we're doing, and how do we do it? So you may, all of you, because you're not new here, the word wisdom probably just popped into your head. That's what we need to deal with confusion. And my buddy Tim Keller, that's what TK stands for, Tim Keller says that wisdom is knowing what to do in 90% of life situations that the moral law does not address. So situations like, who do you marry, or which career do you pursue, or which conflict de-escalation tact do you use in any one situation? I mean, the 10 Commandments aren't going to tell you to do that or exactly what to do. We have to use wisdom to figure out how to move. Another way Tim Keller puts a definition of wisdom that I like a lot is he says it's competence in regard to the complexities of life. So that sounds super helpful in dealing with, life. We should definitely have wisdom. The Bible says, though, let me just put this out there, that wisdom is a chasing after the wind. Yay. That's not helpful. Also, it says in Ecclesiastes 1:17 and 18, he says, I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly, but I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind, for with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. Well, that's a bummer, because it also says, your first blank there, Proverbs chapter 2, you can literally read any sentence in that whole entire chapter, because the chapter title is Moral Benefits of Wisdom. Let's just pick some at random. For the Lord gives wisdom, and from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He holds victory in store for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk as blameless. Oh, let's see. It will save you, wisdom, from the adulteress, from the wayward wife with her seductive words. So all sorts of good things it says about it there in Proverbs 2. Proverbs 19, verse 8 is the next blank. And it says, Proverbs 19:8, here we go. He who gets wisdom loves his own soul. He who cherishes understanding prospers. That's a little bit the opposite of what the Bible already said about wisdom. Yay! Proverbs 16:16 also, let's see what that says. How much better to get wisdom than gold, to choose understanding rather than silver. It's not griefy or sorrowy. That's clearly another thing about Proverbs. Or perhaps the scariest of all our examples is Isaiah 53. Now, this doesn't actually use the word wisdom, but as I was reading some of the wisdom material, some things that it says about wisdom are just, listen, it says, okay, who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. That sounds wise. just based on some of the things it says about wisdom. It says, like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised and was not esteemed. Surely he took up our infirmities and carries our sorrows, yet considered him stricken by God. So he's got a correct understanding of who's causing things. That sounds like wisdom. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. We are like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet did not open his mouth, knew when to speak and when to be silent. It just sounds like our suffering Savior is very wise and uses wisdom to correctly move. So our suffering servant, like I said, looks pretty wise. Those are your next blanks. So, ... wisdom is essential and yet futile, ? See? Confusing, right? There's confusion abounding. Wisdom itself is confusing, but somehow we're supposed to use it to clear up confusing things and ambiguous instructions. So that got us to the bottom of page 1. Does everybody have all their blanks? Yes, Karen?
I don't have all my blanks.
Okay, what you need?
Okay, go back up to, well, that's a bummer because it also says, I
Proverbs,
missed those 3.
Okay, Proverbs 2 is the first one, just the whole chapter. And then Proverbs 19:8 and Proverbs 16:16. I guess I could have done those in numerical order, but I didn't.
Okay, so the blanks are the verses there.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay.
Ma'am.
Sorry.
No
I
problem.
got a little bit lost.
Good? I speak quickly. It is one of the burdens. I will repeat as many times as I need to. Just grab me. Okay. All right. Page 2. So wisdom itself is confusing. And there are more confusing things. I've made a list of things that I think can be really confusing to execute in our Christian life and living out our call. So there's a scientific principle in science and biology and stuff, and it goes, correlation does not prove causation, which means, like in biology, if you see, I don't know, calcium showing up in the blood at the same time as some other thing, it is not safe to assume that the one is causing the other. That's not, just because they correlate does not prove one causes the other. And I think spiritually we have some issues like that. For instance, like our works and our righteousness. There's a correlation, but it can be hard to figure out causation. Like, what makes a person righteous? Is it what they do? I mean, no, but also if you're righteous, you're going to do good things. So yes, I don't know, confusing. Or faith and joy, right? Some people seem to have this joy and happiness, but they don't have faith in God. That doesn't make sense. And some people have great faith. They don't seem to have like a lot of joy or happiness. So there's a correlation, obviously, because we only get joy through our faith in the Lord, but there's not, causation can be, what? Or obedience and prosperity. What? That doesn't make any sense. So I have, next to that one, I wrote Ecclesiastes 9:11 through 12, because it illustrates it beautifully. Where are you, Ecclesiastes? When you have so many scriptures noted, your little secret sheets are not as fast as you would like them to be. So, Proverbs, Psalms, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes. Here we go. I put Ecclesiastes 9:11 through 12 next to that one, which says, I have seen something else under the sun. The race is not to the swift, or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise, or wealth to the brilliant, or favor to the learned. But time and chance happen to them all. Moreover, no man knows when his hour will come. As fish are caught in a cruel net, or birds are taken in a snare, so men are trapped by evil times that fall unexpectedly upon them. It's that thing we dealt with yesterday. You can't behave your way into safety. And that seems confusing. It seems like if you behave well, good things should happen. Or the next one, having physical needs, which we do, and you're unwise to never address that, but also really, you only need Jesus. The whole man does not live on bread alone thing. What? That's confusing. How do we How do we marry those two? Or being nice versus being good. I mean, this one's big for me. I'm not genuinely nice person. I don't, you know what I mean? What if it's good? What if it's more love to speak a hard truth now, but you hold back because you want to be nice? That nice doesn't cause good, nor good. What? It's confusing. Or a different, slightly separate than the correlation does not prove causation issues of our faith, which there are many. There's also just the fact that more than one thing is true at a time in the world that we live in. You know, it will be true that we're trying to be wise in a world where person X thinks person B is being unreasonable, but they're not, or they also are. You know what I mean? Like you have to go, okay, these two things are true. How do I move forward with them? And that can be difficult. We live in simultaneous kingdoms. That's confusing. We're a member of God's kingdom also. We're stuck here on earth in this kingdom. How do you deal with that? How do you know exactly where the line is between enacting out your citizenship in the world and doing it in a way that really is reflective of your citizenship in God's kingdom? How do you do that? I don't know. It's confusing. Or how do you know when to accept something with grace or when to fight to bring God's change? How do you know when to do that? That's confusing. I think we have to do both, right? That's the serenity prayer, right, Mona? Give me the strength to accept the things I cannot change and the wisdom, or in the whatever that is, but the wisdom to know the difference. It's confusing. And also something confusing in this life is you're only right if you're right. You know what I mean? Like you see an issue, you want to engage in conflict resolution with this issue. So you pick a path and you're only right if you're right. Like, and you're not going to know that till afterwards, if ever. And that's confusing. How do you gauge your success and how do you know when to change tact if you don't know if you're right? Unless you're right. How do you deal with that? That's confusing. Or everyone is called, but very rarely to the same thing. So how can you look at someone else's call and judge whether they've answered it or not, to even glean things about learning your own call and knowing if you've answered it or not? You really can't. You know, it seems very, very difficult. So as I've cast my eye over all the very confusing things that exist in our faith and in our world, I wondered, well, where do I go from here? Now I'm utterly confused, which is my point. I was trying to prove there's confusion here. How do we get out? How do we get out? What's the answer? Well, I heard, it was Tim Keller saying it, but I think he was quoting. He was saying that there's an old definition of wisdom. So like the Stoic or the philosophers back in the day, right? They would say that wisdom is seeking to conform my soul to reality. And the converse of that is that magic is seeking to conform reality to my soul. And I think that's a little helpful. Like, okay, well, that's what I want. I think there is reality and I want to conform my soul to that. I don't think I have the power to change all of reality just to my little soul. So the question then becomes, what is reality? Right? I have to know that now. Which is where I think Tim Keller's definition of wisdom being competence in regard to the realities of life or the complexity of life comes in here. So these next 6 blanks are also scriptures, and they are illustrative of what I think reality is according to the Bible. So I'm not going to read the first one because it's very long. I'll tell you about it though. The first one is Job chapter 38, I guess verse 1, all the way through chapter 42, verse 6. This is God answering Job. And he pretty much is just saying it's the where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Which star did you lay again? Oh yeah, all of these things like that. How have you been here to deal with it? Also, the second one underneath that, because they have arrows that correlate to what's underneath them. So I'm going to do the first column on the left there. Ecclesiastes 11:5 says, as you do not know the path of the wind or how the body is formed in a mother's womb, so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things. Okay. All right. And the bottom column on that left side is Isaiah 55:8 and 9. which says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." So those three follow their arrow down to, so reality is unknowable to me. That doesn't seem helpful, but we're not done. Stick with me. All right. So everybody got those blanks filled in? Are we good? Okay. So on the right side, under the question is, what is reality? The first blank on the right side is Genesis 1:1. And that correlates, follow its arrow down to, that means reality is made up of what God created. God created reality. And under that, the second blank would be John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall have everlasting life. Follow that arrow down to, that means reality is characterized by God's limitless love. And then underneath John 3:16, I wrote Romans 8:28, which I really should have fully memorized, especially this year. But let's just go through the practice of looking it up, and maybe that'll get us closer to memorizing it, so it can just sit there in my heart where it belongs. Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. So follow its arrow down, and that reality has been designed for our ultimate flourishing. So far about reality, we know that we can't really know it, but God created it. It involves his limitless love, and his limitless love dictates that he wants us to flourish. So there's some clarity in that. There's good news there. Okay, let's keep going. I heard a helpful metaphor. I don't think this is going to be new for you guys, but it's still a good thought exercise. Tim Keller says, of course, he's my favorite. I listen to him all the time. I am widening my repertoire, but he's a good one. He says that we relate to God not like, that's your first blank there on the third page, is not like someone, I drew a building because he says we do not relate to God like someone on a first floor relates to someone on a third floor. He's not simply just higher than us and we can walk up the stairs and go discover him. That is not how we relate to him. So we relate to God not like that, but like we relate to, like the characters in a book relate to their author. We more relate to God more like that than we do someone on the third floor to the first floor, right? Which means we can only know him if he reveals himself to us. Timmy always tells a story about there's some novel back in the day some lady wrote. It was like I don't know what her main character was, a guy, and I guess I don't remember if he was a detective or whatever, but the point is she fell in love with her character. And then and it was, she wrote a series of books with this character, and on one of them she writes a new character in who is almost exactly like her, and she ends up being the love of this character. So she almost wrote herself in so that she could have a relationship with her own character. And he's saying that's what God does for us. The only way we can know him is if he reveals himself to us, because he's so much higher than us. So next blanks. So we can only really know of reality. What can we know? We can know the character and love of God. Almost the only things we can know. Okay. But how? How do we know that? John 14, 8 through 14 says, let me find it. All right, John 14, 8 through 14. Philip said, Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us. And Jesus answered, don't you know me, Philip? Even after I have been among you such a long time? Anyone who sees me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and that the Father is in me? The words I say to you are not just my own. Rather, it is the Father living in me who is doing his work. Believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or at least believe on the evidence of the miracles themselves. I tell you the truth, anyone who has faith in me will do what I have been doing. He will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father, and I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Son may bring glory to the Father. You may ask me for anything in my name, and I will do it. Or Colossians 1:15 through 20 says, He, Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things were created by him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And one more, Matthew 11:27 says, all things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. So we primarily know the character and love of God through Jesus. Is that blank right there?
Jen, I heard N.T. Wright say something interesting recently. He said, we have ideas in our head about God, that we gather from scripture, from experience, from life. We have ideas about God, and we tend to apply those ideas to Jesus. But in reality, he says, N.T. Wright says, we should look at Jesus and learn about God from him. And we approach it backwards a lot of times without realizing it, which I thought was a really interesting distinction.
Yeah, it's that correlation does not prove causation sort of thing. It's which is the primary, which must come first. First things must come first. He sounds like a smart fella. He must be listening to me. She says, joking. Okay. All right. So let's see what Matthew 6:33 says together really quick. Matthew 6:33. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. So I wrote, so we chase after only him, because really he's the only thing that we can know. Now stick with me. I'm going to say some things that are pretty general, broad sweeps, and they are true, I think, but I don't think they're the only true thing. We're going to go to the other side also, but we're going to start on one side. We're going to start on the only him side. So let's think about that. So if we really only are meant to chase after only him, then perhaps, therefore, we aren't responsible for deciding what things to accept and what things to change, but rather gleaning what his love will and will not tolerate. That's kind of exactly like the difference that N.T. Wright was talking about. It's not that we don't need to know what to accept and change. It's just that's not what we understand first. We must understand first what God's love will and will not accept. Then we'll know what to tolerate and what not to tolerate, right? Maybe? Or the next one. So we don't need to know exactly our neighbor's physical, spiritual, and psychological needs, and the exact physical, spiritual, and psychological technique to deal with them. Not that we don't need to know those, but primarily we need to know, or more, we need to know how God loves them. Just the extreme, everything that God loves for them. And then the third one, perhaps then we are not responsible for manufacturing our own joy through circumstance, but more know the depth of his love for us and how it will not fail, because that has to come before joy can anyway. So the complexities of everything really aren't our job. I do believe he has designed it so that his love fixes all problems, so we need to know it, trust it, and walk in it, so that things will go well with you, at least, and it isn't least, ultimate things will. So that's a nice, cheery, happy place to just leave it. Like, okay, Seco, first things first, yay. And that's true, but it does beg some questions. And I think we're going to go through these on the next page. So, are we all caught up blank-wise? Everybody happy? Anybody comments, questions, concerns? I can't. Mona, what you got? You're muted.
I was just sitting here thinking when you was talking, he gives us wisdom. He gives us nothing if we don't let him know we're sincere about it. And I think, and another thing, we have to turn the things over to him and trust and have faith. And just recently, I have got some changes going on in my life, major. And so in those situations, I ask God, grant me knowledge of your will for me. And give me the power to carry it out. And if it's not your will, throw everything in front of me. Don't let anything take place that I'm doing, because I'm not sure about it. And it's good. It's good. That's what I've been doing. I don't know.
I happen to agree with you. I think you'll see that here at the bottom of the page, Mona. You're moving quicker than me. So, right, if we're supposed to trust God for these complexities, right, and we're supposed to trust him to deal with all that, first thought is I'm dealing with corrupt human beings, right? So that lends itself heavily to the abuse of power. You know what I mean? Like, so when following God's call, if God takes from us or allows or causes hard for our own benefit, then humans might think that we can cause harm on other people and say it's for their benefit, right? And so how do we know when that's good or when that's bad? And I think the answer to that is, well, you don't refuse. You follow God's character. It's that Mother Teresa quote is unfortunately the answer to that, where she goes, well, she lists all the things. I quoted it once in a table talk. I didn't pull it up, but I think you'll get the gist when I say it. She'll say, if you're patient, people may take advantage of you. Be patient anyway. If you're kind, people may X, do it anyways. And she goes through all the things. And then she says, because at the end, it wasn't between you and them anyway. It was between you and God. So yeah, there is space for abuse of power. There is space for people lying. There is, but you don't. We don't. That's all you can do on that one, I think. And I think we'll get to dealing with that amongst each other next week when we talk about insult here at death's door. So hold on to that. We're not quite done with that thought. But the blank there is just you don't. All right, next. If I primarily need to just love, that can cause laziness to sneak in, and we don't do our due diligence when loving for the Lord. So maybe I could think, well, it's not my job to fix their psychology, but that doesn't for an instant give me permission to not even consider and deeply think on other people's problems or challenges or who humans are and how we work and good ways to talk to them. That's not what that means. It just means that primarily, I should depend on God to deal with it while equipping myself in the best form that I absolutely can. So the answer the blanks under that is same as above. You don't let love give you permission to not do your due diligence. Do both. Love primarily, but also do your due diligence, right? All right, so the next one. With God, when more than one thing is true, they will, and I put, usually work together. So this one's complicated. but also true. I mean, at least in God holds all things together. So whenever you have a problem, like someone's on this side of an issue and someone's on this side of an issue, somehow the solution might be for one person to learn or whatever, but sometimes these things aren't movable. They're just true things about reality. And instead of like looking at them as burdens or confusing signs, we should look at them like marks on a road. Like, okay, well, I'm not going to go that way of here, and I'm not going to go that way of there, which means the answer lies somewhere in the middle, right? I know that's super vague, and I would wrecked my brain for an applicable example to talk about, but I just couldn't think of one at the time. But it is true that sometimes more than one thing is true, and they seem sometimes like they don't work together, but usually with God, he can hold them all together. True things remain, and he can handle them. Oftentimes, like, they work together kind of like guideposts marking the narrow road. Your blanks there. And the narrow road implies that sometimes we will miss, right? Sometimes we are going to do it wrong. And therefore, we need to be excellent at, but not only are these things we need to be good at, I think they're also judges of our motives. If these things of us are not true that we're about to list, then we should question our motives. What are these things? We need to be excellent at apologizing. Right? If maybe you're going to get it wrong sometimes, it's built in that you should be amazing at apologizing. This is a skill we should develop. And if you're not willing to do it, you need to check your motives. Same for me, right? Mirror. Let's see. I think I should have read this a minute ago before I wrote apologizing, but we're going to read it anyways. Ecclesiastes 7:15 through 18. I have that marked as Q. Here we go. 7:15 through 18. In this meaningless life of mine, I have seen both of these. A righteous man perishing in righteousness, and a wicked man living long in his wickedness. Do not be over righteous, neither be over wise. Why destroy yourself? Do not be over wicked, and do not be a fool. Why die before your time? It is good to grasp the one and not let go of the other. The man who fears God will avoid all extremes. I think this, if wisdom for wisdom's sake, don't die on that hill. And foolishness for foolishness' sake, don't die on that hill. God's love, that's the hill you die. All right. Next, if we need to be good at apologizing, we're going to want others to be, and we also need to be excellent at forgiving. That's the next one. They go hand in hand. And we shouldn't be surprised by them either or think they're signs of ultimate failure. They should just be expected, and we should be excellent at these. And the more we're excellent at forgiving, the better people around us can be at apologizing, and we can all just be better, right? So Ecclesiastes 7:21 and 22. What's that one say? Do not pay attention to every word people say, or you may hear your servant cursing you, for you know in your heart that many times you yourself have cursed others. And then our last thing, or not the last thing, surely, but the last thing that came to my mind of things that we must be good at and that we can use to test our motives is, are we willing to adjust our plan? Because if you find for any reason that it is not the best way to live out God's love and you're not willing to adjust your plan, that's a bit of a problem. I wrote Ecclesiastes 12, 13, and 14 next to that one. All right, so this is the last verses of Ecclesiastes. This is the teacher summing things up. He says, now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. So we can decide, all right, that means God will handle it, and I don't have to do my due diligence. I don't have to do these hard things for him. I can just wait. But I don't think that's what it means. I don't think that's what it's encouraging us to do either. I think it's a good judge of motive. So we can continue on doing our best, loving the Lord, learning to be good at apologizing and forgiving and adjusting our plan, because it really doesn't depend on us anyways. We just get to participate. as a gift. So yes, there will be confusion, but we have guideposts and we can work on it together, and yay. So I don't really fix confusion, just talked about it a little bit because it is rife. Yeah,
Jen,
ma'am.
loved the apologize and adjust the plan being merged there. Those are really hand in hand, and they emphasize each other nicely.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions or comments or other helpful scriptures or anything to share at all?
Well, I'm not sure I have any of that, but along with what you're saying down there about adjusting your plan, I think we could have a whole conversation about our own expectations and how we get tied up in knots when things don't work out the way we expect them to for whatever reason. So
You may
that's
hear more about that under next week's topic, which is insult.
fantastic.
There is insult here at Death's Door that we must deal with, and we're going to talk about it next week. Yay!
Well, I'm going to say that I'm terrible about expectations, and so I asked to help me to stay out of expectations if I can. And another thing, it doesn't mean that other people are going to accept your apologies and you're making amends and stuff. It just means you've got to do your part if you want to be happy.
Yeah, well, and that's why primarily,
Uh,
I said, and that's why in my mind, the way I deal with that is to primarily make sure I'm seeking the Lord. I also want to do these other good things. But if they were my primary goal and I find I haven't met them, I'm destroyed. Right? But if they were my secondary goal and I find that I'm off a little bit, but my primary goal of seeking the Lord is still intact, it's easier to deal with, because you're right, expectations are hard. I think that's why sometimes it's easier to talk to a stranger than your own loved ones or whatever, because they have expectations, you have expectations. Yeah, all that. Absolutely. Well, I think I'm out of time. If you guys are in the building, going to have time for coffee and all that before worship. So thank you so much. Until next time.